Start the clock.
Good afternoon. Afternoon. Time will be
Real time.
Welcome back to another episode of Supercoach breaking down the top 10. So in this show, what we basically do is break down the top 10 currently ranked teams in Supercoach and have a look at the players in those teams. Basically, to try to give us an advantage going forward using that information. I know a lot of people said the top 10, just looking at the top 10, there isn't enough data there. It is sort of true. But on the flip side, I think if you look at the top 100 to the top 10, you're getting a similar sort of variance as far as who are the bulk players in those teams, and they're the reason why they are where they are and why we're chasing. Or you might be one of those people in the top 100, and if you are, congratulations. If you're just playing for league wins and basically your cash league and stuff like that, this stuff's sort of irrelevant for you. But if you're playing catch up like me and most of us, and you're aiming for that top spot, no matter how far off it is, it's about using that information sort of going forward to maybe break out from the norm and try to improve your team that way. You're going to need a bit of luck from here on in, let's face it. So, for example, from 2 weeks ago, just looking at every team had Neil, it was 100%, and Boak, and they were the two important factors to teams' success at the start of the season. And so instead of bringing those players at a top price, I decided to zig when they zagged. And basically I brought in Jolly, Josh Kelly, and Jeremy Cameron instead in hopes of sort of breaking away and getting an edge because they're at a cheaper price point, and I'm banking that those players can sort of keep up for the rest of the year and score better than those players. So that's what we did there. So with that said, let's take a look at the top 10 teams. There's been a bit of a difference in those last 2 weeks. So looking at the top 10 teams, there's 6 new teams from 2 weeks ago, and there really isn't much between second to 100. It's really close, but the first place getter at the moment is Ryder to Gray, and he's kicked away from everyone else. He's basically got a 250-point buffer from second place, and he's got a really strong team, and I expect him to hold the lead at least until the buys. And then we probably see some sort of changes from then on end. The interesting part about his team is he doesn't have Gorn Groney combo, so he's running Robert Rock 2, so it'd be interesting to see what he does from here on end as far as that goes. He'd be wanting to get Gorn in pretty soon, I guess, or he might be like me and wait till the buys. So with that said, let's take a look at the defenders and go from there. So Hearn, Whitfield, and Lloyd, they stand out from the pack. Clearly averaging a good 15 more than everyone else. And most of the top 10 teams have a combo of 2 of the 3. So basically, Hearn's in 40% of teams, which is the same from 2 weeks ago. Lloyd's in 50% of the teams, which is down 80%, which is a little bit weird. And Whitfield is in 40%, up from 20. And if you can remember, basically 2 weeks ago is when Lockie Whitfield got injured and put up that 40. I expect most of that top 10 to get Whitfield in the next couple of weeks. His price has bottomed out, and take away that injury affected game, he's clearly the highest averaging defender. So I expect that. Brodie Smith in 100% of teams, same as 2 weeks ago, no surprise. If you're holding Williams, don't worry, because 100% of the top 10 teams are also. Be interesting to see what they do, whether they get trade happy, trying to stay in the top 10 or hold. I'm holding for now. Hopefully it's just a maximum of 2 weeks. I've got cover, so it's not really a problem for me. Muddy Hall, still in 100% of teams, been an important rookie pickup, high-scoring rookie, averaging over 80. And no surprises in the top 10 teams. Ainsworth's a new one in 90% of teams. He was in the bubble 2 weeks ago. Lockhart in 20% of teams. Duzma, 80%, slightly down from 90. I expect him to get traded off in the next couple of weeks. I think most people will be going Duzma to Lockie Whitfield. It's a no-brainer sort of trade. Clark, down 30% of teams, down from 50%. Rory Laird is in 40% of teams, which is up from 20% from 2 weeks ago. Darcy Moore, an interesting one, someone that missed last week. I expect him back into the team this week. 60% held and have him in the top 10, down from 80%. So no surprise there. Most people would have, I think those 20% probably traded Darcy last week. And an interesting one is Rotham, who was in 30% of teams last week. Someone who isn't getting games for West Coast. I think we've got to keep in mind now the buys are coming up. So ideally, you don't want to have non-playing players in your team. And 30% had him 2 weeks ago, and 0% have him this week. And I think that might be a sign of the more savvier teams sort of coming to the forefront that sort of realized that Rotham wasn't going to get listed and didn't trade him in when he was on the bubble. So looking at the midfielder, we can say the usual suspects up top. But Lachie Neale, the standout midfielder so far this year, averaging 11 points higher than the next best. Going over the stats for the top 10 teams, Neale's in 100% of teams. Cripps is in 100. Sloane's in 50. A little surprising. That's up 40% from 2 weeks ago. Zach Merritt is a POD. 20% of teams have him. For me, someone that I shy away from just because I know that when he gets tagged, it's just hurt his scoring in the past, and teams are going to either tag him or Shield. And knowing that it works in Merritt, I think they'd probably go Merritt over Shield. We'll see in the next few weeks. He's been in really good form, so I expect him to cop the tag, and let's see if he can finally overcome it. And if he does, he becomes a player that people will be looking to bring in. Rockcliffe's in 30% of teams, which is the same as this time last time. Fife's a big watch was on Fife. Basically, it was in 60% of teams 2 weeks ago, in 100% this week. We sort of predicted that would happen. He bottomed out in price and everyone jumped on. Walsh was in 100% of teams, now only in 60%. So 40% of teams have offloaded him and cashed out. Stack, gun rookie in 90% of teams. Constable's in 50%, slightly down from 60%. Atkins is a big drop. Got hurt, was in 60% of teams, now only in 10%. Drew was in 100% of teams, now only in 70%. He's sort of ripe to get traded. Dropped last week, sort of maxed out price-wise, and I expect more teams to be trading him off. Oliver's in 40% of teams, had that massive score 2 weeks ago. It would have helped a lot of people out. It's up from 20%. McRae's a really big surprising one for me. Still only in 30% of teams. Bottomed out in price. He's at that 580 mark with a 90 break even of 90. I expect a lot of the top teams trying to get him in this week. Jolly in 50% of teams, was in 0 2 weeks ago. Come back in from injury, bottomed out in price, so no surprise to see him in there. I think he's a top 3 midfielder for the rest of the year. Treloar's in 30% of teams, nice POD, Hollywood's best midfielder. Libba was in 90% of teams, everyone's jumped off. He's only in 10% of the top 10 teams currently. Hayes, he's sort of a bust of a rookie, and he's in 80% of teams. I expect him to get dropped this week, and a lot of people are going to have to carry him during the buys unless they offload for a really small price jump. I think he's only earned about 80,000. Gibbons still in 20% of teams. Matty Crouch in 20% of teams, was in 60. Having him would have hurt that injury-riddled game where he only scored 60 and then missing this week. A lot of people jumped off, or they didn't have him and didn't have to copy his 60 2 weeks ago. Stock is a new player. In 60% of teams have picked him up. I'm not really sold on him. I don't know if he holds his spot. He had 18 touches and only scored a 60 last week. So we'll see going forward. And 50% of teams are still carrying Scott, and I don't see him getting a game during the buys. He copped a concussion in the VFL 2 weeks ago, and I think he struggles to get back into the team, at least in the short-term future. So people are going to be stuck with him during the buys. That's the midfield covered. Let's check out the rucks. The rucks are pretty simple, actually. So Rob's the most important one at the moment. He was only in 20% of the top 10 teams. 2 weeks ago. Now he's in 50. So I think it's again that the sign of the more savvy teams sort of coming to the forefront that were able to pick him up because he was sort of a no-brainer, and it makes a big difference having him to not having him. It's basically an extra 400k, and a lot of those teams will be offloading him this week, and they'll be bringing in your Jelly and your McRae. Grundy's in 100% of teams, and Gorn's in 70. Slightly surprising. I think all that top 10 that don't have Gorn will be looking to get him in. Preferably, at least. The forward line's been the most interesting line all year. It's sort of a roller coaster. We still aren't sure on who the top 6 forwards are going to be, but we're getting some sort of idea. Going over the percentage of players in the top 10 teams. Well, before I do, David Mundy, the second highest scoring defender, he's been flying. He's got a throw-around average of 130, and he's in 0% of teams. And I haven't seen him in any teams in all my leagues. Everyone sort of missed the boat on him. I know a lot of people started with him, and he sort of looked like he was going to be old man Mundy, and got off to a shocking start. So everyone offloaded him after round 1 and 2, and he's just kicked off from there. So they're terribly unlucky. And everyone sort of missed out on the really good price. So he's now priced at $5.91 and has a really low break even. So he's only going to go up in price. And I think everyone sort of missed the boat on him. So it'd be interesting to see what everyone does in his regard going forward. Heaney's in 60% of the teams. It's down from 90%. And I just wonder how many offloaded Heaney. Hi, George. Looking at you. There probably would have been a few. They'd probably be regretting that decision. Caleb Daniels in 40% of teams, sort of held the same sort of spot. He was in 40% last time. Paddy Dangerfield's in 100%. Boak was in 90%, now in 80%. He's been one of the key players. He is the highest scoring forward. Dropped off the last couple of weeks. Got a 3-round average of 95. But starting with him definitely gave you a big edge. Dunkley in 50% of teams. It's the big mover in the forward line. Was in 10%. Bottomed out a week ago, and you could get him at a really good price. The only problem is we really can't trust Beveridge, and his midfield rotation is hell-bent on doing it. He's got Bailey Smith running through there, and he's just rotating players. Libba was in there a lot more last week compared to the previous two. If Dunkley can play in the midfield and doesn't get rotated in that forward line midfield, he's a really good pickup. And you can bank an average over 100. But the fact that Bevo's mixing and matching, it's sort of a lottery on Dunkley at this point. Tally's in 90% of teams, up from 50%. Had that huge game 2 weeks ago. Colbert's in 30%. Colbert held his spot at 30%. Parker's an interesting one, was in 40%, now in 20%. And if you have him, you've got to offload him because he's got a massive break even. I think it's 100 plus, and he's just going to leak cash. So that's a trade you probably have to make this week if you have him. Baker's in 60% of teams, slightly up from 50%. Bowles was a really surprising one. Only in 10% of the top 10 teams, and set to make a bit of money, has a break even of negative 23, I think, around that mark. So he's set to make some money finally. And with all the rucks out from Richmond, he might get a lot more time in the ruck, and he might be a potential F6, at least going forward until the buys, being able to put up handy scores. Warple's in 30% of teams. If you started with him, he's been a decent pick, I guess. A 90 average, you would have taken that at the start of the season. Petrocelli was in 90% of teams, now in 30. I think a lot of people offloaded. Doesn't look like he's going to make money. He hasn't gone up in price. He's stayed stagnant the last 3 weeks, and it looks like he's going to stay stagnant. He's got like that average of around 60. The only good thing about him coming up for the buys is I think he has a lot of job security. I don't see him getting dropped from that team. And Billings is in 30% of teams, which is up from 0. It's also interesting that none of the top 10 teams have Roland Marshall, and I think it's been a good pickup and someone who is going to average a minimum of 90, and you could have picked him up for 400k. The only downside was when he missed that game basically through injury, sort of hurt. But yeah, that's the end of the video. Gone through all the lines. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was a little bit helpful. If it was, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel, please. That helps. And we'll see you guys next Sunday night with a review of the round. So take care.